When I imagined black female slaves, I thought of powerless, subservient women who had no choice but to succumb to the will of their masters. Now that I have taken a course on freedom and confinement with regard to the African American experience, I am more familiar with the stories of female slaves who, by resisting their oppressors, showed they were not total victims. These daring women fought against their dehumanization in ways that force us to broaden our definition of resistance. Resistance for them didn't necessarily mean stepping over spatial boundaries or engaging in physical altercations. Two notable examples of such women are Harriet Jacobs and Margaret Garner, whose forms of resistance were rooted in their freedom and the freedom of their children. In her 1861 slave narrative, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, Jacobs writes about her eventful life as an enslaved mother and her struggles against her iniquitous white slaveholder, Dr. Flint. During one such struggle, Jacobs, upon learning that her children would be sent to Dr. Flint's plantation to be exposed to its harsh and life-threatening conditions, initiated a plan to save her children from the wrath of fieldwork by hiding in her grandmother's small attic. She hoped that Dr. Flint, under the false impression that she had gone to the north, would sell her children to better conditions. Jacobs remained in that attic, stagnant and immobile, for 7 years. Showing her determination and will for the sake of her children, she writes, "I tried to be thankful for my little cell, dismal as it was, and even to love it as part of the price I had paid for the redemption of my children." Jacobs recalls that she learned to bear the suffocating prison in which she lay for many years, all for the freedom of her beloveds. Jacobs' prevailing maternal sentiment pushes her to use innovative forms of revolt in the service of her and her children's freedom, even in the constricted space of her grandmother's attic, and in the confined system of slavery she is supposedly ruled by. As was the case with Harriet Jacobs, Margaret Garner's sense of motherhood served as an impetus for her resistance. An enslaved African American woman, Garner fled with her husband and 4 children from her Kentucky plantation in January of 1856. The Garners succeeded in crossing the Ohio River, but they were later found by a group of slave owners. Before the fugitive slaves were captured, Garner used a butcher knife to kill her daughter of 2 years and attempted to kill her 3 others, but was stopped before she could do so. Historically, people have thought of her as insane. Others have said that she lacked maternal love. I believe her thoughts and actions were a reflection of her own desires for her children, and that she freed them from the misery of slavery in the only way she knew how. This sentiment is articulated by Jacobs, who upon seeing her master's dehumanizing plantation wrote, "When I lay down beside my child, I felt how much easier it would be to see her die than to see her master beat her about, as I daily saw him beat other little ones." Jacobs' sentiments suggest that many women pondered this form of resistance. However, it was Garner who took these dire measures to show her opposition to slavery and the agony it causes. Notorious for her alleged insanity and love deficiency, Garner was actually a mother whose form of resistance against the slave system had a tragic outcome, and whose actions were rooted in the desire for her children to be released from the confines of slavery, to be eternally free. I consider Garner and Jacobs testaments to female slaves' maternal motives for resistance, and I believe that their endeavors to ensure their children's freedom have been conflated with ubiquitous notions of male resistance, which associates and determines resistance through only physical standards. Because these notions have become the epitome of slave resistance, gaining freedom has become a masculinized concept that skews the image of female slaves. It overlies the fact that they were not always at the service of white despots. Rather, they thought of their own children and used their individuality and strength of mind to carry out acts of unmitigated revolt against their masters and the very institution of slavery.